The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, listeners to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Oh my goodness, Chuck, my tongue is tied today. How are you on this wonderful, wonderful day?
The case of the tongue-tiedness. Is that yes? No, I'm doing great. Still excited. The book, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist, or The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, has been out, and we are having fun with that. We're developing all kind of videos, and we're working on a hardcover copy of that book, and so there's just some great things. And if you don't know what we're talking about, you need to go to Ultimate Guide to HR, Ultimate Guide to HR. That is a book that John and I wrote based on our many, well, that's where I stopped. And John, many years. No, actually, John is younger than, I don't know. Anyways, based on our many years of experience in HR and leadership, we put this together over 85 checklists, Ultimate Guide to HR. John, I just had to get that in there because I get so excited when I think about it.
It is exciting. I think anybody, the more I work with the written word, the more I write books, I am much more appreciative of the people that have taken the effort to write a book. And get it out there, get it out into the world. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of things. You have a lot of people in the background helping and supporting you to get there. And so I understand why you're excited. And I think it's a good thing to be excited about. And, because if you were like, well, we wrote this book and blah, I would be a little worried. So that's good. What else is going on in the world of HR?
Well, we have some news to share. I'll tell you that just came out the other day. The EEOC ended their fiscal year just a few weeks ago, September 30th. And then 2024, it included claims where workers were harassed based on multiple protected statuses. 110 cases that the EEOC has basically, they found merit in lawsuits, and they've taken them forward. But get this, John, a large chunk of them were accused employers of fostering environments where workers were consistently harassed based on sex and race. That's the theme of most of the lawsuits from the 2024 EEOC fiscal year.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think we see a lot of that, unfortunately, in the workplace. And that number seems low to me, but you're saying that's the ones they chased, right? That's the ones they took to court, where there was probably other ones they settled, and then there are other ones that maybe came forward and they didn't feel had the merits.
Yes. So these are called merit lawsuits, where they are beyond just, hey, we settled it. Hey, we're going to fine them. These are going to courts and the court system. So the EEOC is now taking forward these, so it'll be EEOC versus XYZ company.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So I found that to be.
And you never want to be on that side, right? You never want to be getting to court. And again, and we put it in the checklist, how to handle an EEOC claim against you. You want to be prepared for that if that does happen, and make sure you're taking the right steps, because you don't want to retaliate. You don't want to do those things. I think it becomes really important that you kind of follow through on all those things. Again, it happens. And sometimes it's the circumstance, employer and circumstances. And I always talk to my clients about, like, let's take this as a lesson. Let's listen to what they have to say. Let's not get defensive. Let's really kind of go through that, protect ourselves, right? Get that employment lawyer there. But let's also take it in like, hey, if we did something wrong, let's correct that going forward, so we're not in that same situation again.
Right. And there's a lot of emotions when someone brings these things up, and the HR person or the senior leadership person on site needs to maintain a cool head and basically look at these situations from all angles rather than to get so defensive right away. And sometimes that will kick things up. It'll just heat things up.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Hey, John, what do you got?
We got a lot of things going on. Let me ask you this, Chuck. I know that you're musical, right? You like your music, you're a musician.
Sure.
So what kind of music do you like to listen to when you work?
When I work, I'll put on like a nice classical, music type of thing, background, or sometimes I'm in the mood for polkas. So I'll tell Alexa to play Polka Jammer Radio.
Wait, wow, I didn't know. So there was this article the other day in Fast Company, and researchers have looked into what kind of music makes employees more productive.
Oh.
So do you think it's polka? What do you think it is?
Maybe it's hard screamo rock.
No, the study revealed that familiar, predictable music strengthened the participants' ability to keep sequences straight, while familiar music tweaked to be more atonal put a roadblock in participants' path. Oh. Right? And so it's that equal the equal predictability in the music allowed people to be there more, right? And so probably less punk rock, probably more classic, right? And so maybe more country, less rock and roll.
Yeah, if they're familiar with it, I guess. That's interesting. I can see why. Like, if I'm familiar with the music, it just washes over my brain and through it. There's no blockages. I'm not having to think about it. I don't have to try it. It just flows real nicely. But if I'm not familiar with it, I'm disjointed and my brain's processing the music and I can't concentrate on my work. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, and again, it helps with cognitive clarity. But they also say that new music that you're not familiar with, may allow them to stick with a task longer.
Oh,
so maybe it depends on what you're doing, right? And so there's kind of things in there as well.
Yeah.
But I just thought that was kind of interesting to think about, because I thought, it's going to be, rock music or classical music or something like that. But it's not. It's what's really more familiar, predictable for you individuals in the workplace.
That's a fascinating study. That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. I thought that was interesting on there. What else do you got going?
Well, let's see. I know that Supreme Court is coming out with a new term very shortly, and the ADA, they've got a number of cases they have to settle. And it actually, I'm sorry, it began earlier this month, okay? Earlier this month. We've got some ADA cases, one close to where I live normally, even though I'm living temporarily somewhere else, but up there in the city of Sanford, there's a case, Stanley versus city of Sanford, Florida firefighter retired and had Parkinson's disease, and I guess they changed some policies while she was there, and it affected her benefits and her Medicare benefits and her data retirement. It's actually really complicated, and I'm so glad the Supreme Court's going to figure this out rather than you and I. I'll just wait for the case to come through. But that's just one thing that I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to tackle. There's a number of other things. I'm seeing more misgendering. I've seen a few of those coming out over the last couple of weeks or so. When you go to the EEOC newsroom, And so I think the EEOC is really starting to double down on a lot of those types of lawsuits. And I'm sure those things are going to end up in the Supreme Court in the next year. But that's it. I mean, I don't have a lot of hardcore stuff, but I just want to make sure our listeners know that things are afoot.
Yeah, I read an article that said the Supreme Court agrees to consider a woman's claim she lost her job because she is not gay.
Okay.
And so it's interesting because when you look, my first reaction was like, oh, come on, do it. But it does look like, right? And again, it's about sex discrimination. It could be your sexual preferences, your sexual orientation. And it looks like, again, from what I've read, that she may have a case. And so it'll be interesting to see where that ends up in the Supreme Court to kind of dive into some of those things, right? And so
yeah,
I agree with you. I think it's really interesting that as these individual court cases get up to the Supreme Court, what they choose to hear, what they choose not to hear, how it's presented in court really matters a lot. And so always, you say this all the time, there's a lot of Supreme Court cases that change HR. And so I think I become much more attuned to paying attention to what they're doing, because I know not only does it affect people in my life, but it also can affect HR departments as well.
Yeah, there's a lot as new administration comes in, whichever person wins the presidency. A lot of things get adjusted based on who's in power, who has the influence, who's appointing different people to these government organizations. One interesting thing that came out the other day is that, I don't know, a lot of our workers in the hospitality industry are from Haiti, Haitians, been with us for 20, sometimes 30 years, and they've been under this thing called TPS, temporary protection status, where it gets renewed every year, every 2 years. And sometimes it's down to the wire, but it gets renewed and we're able to maintain all their employment, right? But the word came out a couple of days ago that the administration, United States, is not going to renew TPS for, I think they said, Haiti, Venezuela, and one or two other countries, which is really concerning for especially those of us in the hospitality industry. We have throughout the country, we have a lot of Haitians working for us, and here in Florida. So keep your eyes out for that, folks. You might have just heard it first on the HR Stories podcast.
I heard it first. I had not heard that. And kind of paying attention to that. And I think that's, again, it's important. In fact, let me see if I can get to this article real quick. There was an article out. Obviously, the labor report comes out, right? And so one of the things they looked at was what's the percentage of legal immigrants working in the workforce today? And it is, I think it's like 18%. Yeah, 18.6% country's labor force. At the moment, immigrants tend to be younger there, right? So 18.6% of the people in the workforce are legal immigrants to our country.
Wow.
Yeah. And one of this article that they were talking about was, we all know, and I think it's like 6 million open jobs that can't be filled, right? There's just all of these jobs that are out there. In fact, we're going to be talking about that. It's kind of a tease for our main story today.
Excellent.
We do talk about that, right? And so how do you fill those jobs? You don't have them. And what the article is saying is immigration is one way that we can get those jobs filled. And so it's really interesting to kind of see that all play out under the currents of the political situation that's going on right now.
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts about that, but that could be an whole other thing. But I agree. There's look, I got to tell you, the jobs that we have open, a lot of times Americans don't want to do them, and it's just a fact. So there are a lot of immigrants. John, I had a a guy from another country, doesn't speak great English, but okay English, but he's an attorney. He's an attorney with a law firm and lengthy work history, just immigrated here, and he's willing to take a job as like a food runner or a busser.
Right.
Okay. So that to me is really something. That's really something that folks are willing to do that. And I've seen it, and they do it, and they do great jobs. So we need the help. But
yeah. And that happens. I mean, you're in the same situation, but that happens a lot on cruise ships. My wife worked on cruise ships for many years. And there was a lot of individuals not from the United States working on the cruise ships, right?
Mm-hmm,
and they were doctors, they were lawyers, they had their own business back in their home country. They couldn't make ends meet, and so they came onto the cruise ships, and they would do whatever needed to be done to get that money and send it back to their families.
Yeah. So what? So I guess we've got a story to tell. Want to make sure everyone knows again, go to Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition. We're excited about our new book that's out there. Sign up for our newsletter, get a free checklist, and also make sure you check out the team of HR Team of One. That is our Facebook page. Still over 4,500 people, HR professionals, every day, all day, 7 days a week, messaging each other, looking for advice, thoughts, hints, clues, best practices. It's really, someone described it as the best Facebook page for HR out there. And we're real excited about that.
You know, it's funny, Chuck, I was on it earlier before the podcast started. And I love when I go on, somebody asks a question, and within an hour, they get 5 or 6 different opinions on how to handle a particular situation. And a lot of times I'm just like, great, fantastic, keep going, doing the work. And I don't have to say anything. And I just love that, because it's HR people helping HR people, or HR practitioners, I should say, helping other HR practitioners.
Yeah.
And so
free.
Again, Chuck and I jump in there like, hey, well, what about this? Or what about this? And think about this. But it's really each other helping out. And we really appreciate everyone that does that on that.
John, I'm ready for your story. You want to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back to...
Yeah, let's do it. Let's jump in there. Let's take a quick break and come on back.
All right. You've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. Hey, it's Chuck here with the team at HR Stories. You know, in the fast-paced world of HR, you need solutions fast. We are introducing our new book, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, your go-to resource for navigating the complexities of HR with confidence and ease. Hey, whether you're an experienced HR professional, a student, or a small business owner, this book is designed to give you immediate answers to a wide range of HR challenges. You know, wasting time sifting through endless reference books, unreliable web content, countless YouTube videos, our guide cuts through the noise with over 80 actionable HR checklists that cover everything you need in the world of HR, from onboarding and performance management to legal compliance, crisis response. We've got you covered. Why is this book a must-have? Because it provides you with immediate answers, saving you time, helping you avoid costly mistakes, and it's an essential tool for anyone looking to elevate their HR game. So head on over to the Ultimate Guide to HR.com. That's Ultimate Guide to HR.com to get your copy of the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition. Streamline your HR tasks, stay compliant, and create a workplace where both employees and management thrive.
Welcome back, listeners, to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. And if you haven't listened/watched us on our YouTube channel, we do the podcast live, you will find that there's a little extra information presented to the video because you can see, one, see us, and two, Chuck is always doing something to entertain me. And so I always do appreciate that. All right, let's get into the future of work. This is why we're here today, Chuck. I'm excited about this story.
Yes, I guess we're going to explore the ever-evolving workplace and what might be on the horizon.
Yes, we are. Yeah, absolutely. And I wrote an article about this, which you can find on my website, johnthalheimer.com. But I'm really excited to get in this.
Yeah, so that piece, that recent piece, it started with a pretty relatable observation about your neighborhood and how changes can creep up without us noticing. And I like how you take, and that's the great storyteller, right? You just take the little observations, you're able to weave it and then tie it back to something. So could you tell our listeners and me, okay, don't forget about me, what inspired you to connect that to the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the neighborhood I lived in, I walk the dogs every day. We walk them 2 times a day. I'm going through the same neighborhood. I've known this neighborhood for years, and there's been these really subtle changes. New neighbors, updated billboards, things that I hadn't fully acknowledged until they added up to something bigger. And so I'm walking through the neighborhood and I'm like, wow, this neighborhood has really changed. And I started thinking about work. And I started thinking about how work undergoes a similar transition, right? We're there, little changes happening, and then all of a sudden, there's this fundamental change altering the way we work and what we expect from work and how we see our roles in it.
Yeah. And I think about where I've been now for almost 10, 11 months. And I go back, sometimes I was looking through my little notebook and I just can see how things were so different, 5, 6, 8 months ago and how things have shifted. And it happened so slightly. And now I could think, oh my gosh, that was like 1 million years ago and how things have changed over the last 5 months. But you mentioned a fundamental shift in the workplace. So unpack that a little bit. Like what exactly is changing that you're seeing?
Yeah, and I just want to comment. I think sometimes we do need to look in our rearview mirror to see where we've come, right? I do think that's important. We need to focus on the front, but we do need every once in a while to look back and go, oh my goodness, we've done a lot. So here's the thing that I'm thinking, right? The shift we're seeing goes beyond just remote work. Now, that's a big part of it, right? We're hearing a lot about that. We know that's coming. It's a combination of forces like the rise of artificial intelligence, advanced technology, increased accessibility to knowledge, and the gig economy. For example, the pandemic drastically accelerated how we think about work location. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Other factors like automation, a power shift towards employees are reshaping our entire workforce.
Yeah, and speaking of power shifts, you talked about how employees today have more choices and thus more power. I found that fascinating. So can you just go a little further, explain what that means for leaders and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So since 2016, aside from the pandemic, right? We had the pandemic, there was a lot of that. The unemployment rate has been less at or below 5%. So for over 8 years, it's been under 5% without the spike in the middle there, right? This means that there are more jobs than people to fill them. It's in the series with labor shortages, employees have greater freedom to choose where and how they work. The shift gives them more bargaining power, not just in salary negotiation, but also in working conditions and flexibility. Leaders need to be aware of this because if they don't meet employee expectations, people are just going to move on. They're just going to go and look for a better opportunity somewhere else.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I tell you, that's always in the forefront of my mind. It's in the forefront of how we and how I advise our managers to coach and counsel. And of course, always reminding them, find something doing something right also. Okay. Because if they're not happy, they will leave. They do have that bit of an edge. So anyways, that is interesting overall, especially when you factor in what, your comments, and you factor in the rise of the gig economy. It feels like traditional full-time employment is maybe no longer the only option for a lot of workers.
Yeah, I mean, and so I've been really looking in and trying to understand this, because the gig economy is a viable alternative now to traditional jobs. People can now make a living driving for Uber, Lyft, freelancing on platforms like Fiverr, or starting their own online business. According to Bloomberg, nearly 15% of Americans are self-employed. This gives people more control over their careers. It changes the relationship between employers and employees, for sure.
Yeah. So did you say 50%?
15.
15%. Oh,
50%.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I misheard that. So 15 is still a pretty big number. And you mentioned technology, and it seems like that is really, one of the biggest drivers of change. I know that for me, in a normal but standard working for an employer, it's been a driver of change. And then also my ability to be a consultant for a number of years, and your ability, how that technology has driven that change, allowed us to do these things. So how do you see that advanced technology like AI and automation continuing to shape that future of work?
Yeah, and I think and again, it's going to be varying depending on your industry. And I hear a lot of people say, well, it's not going to come to my industry. What can they automate in my industry? I can tell you they can automate almost anything. If you can create a system, they can automate it, right? And so it's really reshaping our work in a significant way. AI, automation, remote technologies are making it possible for more jobs to be done anywhere. Now, in the future, right? In the future, I envision a day where a warehouse technician works from home using virtual reality to move products around. At the same time, automation is eliminating certain jobs altogether. We've already seen things like self-checkout, robotic vacuums. As leaders, we need to think about how to integrate this technology without displacing too many workers. And I think a great example of this, Chuck, is the dock workers strike, right?
Right. I was thinking of that when you were mentioning this.
Right. They want money, right? They wanted money. They wanted more money. The union wanted more money. But one of the big sticking points, which is still a sticking point, is they want to reduce the use of automation at the ports because they don't want to lose jobs. Now, from an employer perspective, you are saying to them, you can't create efficiencies to create more profits. This is going to be a battle. I see this as a battle that's going to continue to play out. So what they did is they postponed that to January. I think that conversation is going to be, the employers need to come up with a way that helps the union workers go, okay, we feel comfortable with this, but also at the same time, increase efficiency through automation.
Yeah. I mean, you are still going to need some people, but that you bring up some great points there. And the whole thing is fascinating, and you've outlined 10 forces that will shape the future of work in your paper. What do you think the biggest challenge, and you kind of laid some things out right there, but the biggest challenge overall leaders face today in preparing for these changes?
Yeah, I think it's adaptability, right? Leaders need to forecast where the organization will be in 5 years and anticipate what are the changes that are coming. One of the things I do, I spend a lot of time doing strategic planning. And one of the conversations we have when we're doing strategic planning is what are the environmental forces that are going to be working on your organization in the next 3 years. And so if leaders aren't doing this, they need to be, right? They need to be thinking, oh, how is AI going to impact us? How is automation? How is this factor going to do that? This means not just looking at profits or customer demographics, but also asking, how will automation or a generational shift affect my workforce? The workplace is evolving quickly, and leaders who can't adapt to these changes will struggle to stay competitive. We see it time and time again in that world.
Yeah, and the preparation thing, part of the preparation I also think would be taking a look at, well, like we at the HR Stories, we tell stories so that people will see what happened to other companies, not make the same mistake. And some of that prep has got to be doing your research to see where other companies have gone in some of these directions with new tech and new technologies, and then trying to put in place an educational piece to not make those same mistakes, but because there are so many unknowns, and, so it sounds like the forecasting and the planning are critical. But
yeah, I mean,
talk to me about that. That's
so as I was saying earlier, that strategic planning is critical, right? And so it needs to be dynamic, meaning we need to be able to adjust as new things come up. We need to adapt. We need to evolve. So leaders need to incorporate these forces into their plan, whether it's employee sentiment, technology advances, or shifts in generation expectations. One approach I recommend is using tools like stay interviews or small group discussions to understand what the employees value. This allows leaders to stay ahead of changes and be ready to adjust when necessary. I have this story, right? I was talking to one of my friends from high school, and he was saying that he's a little frustrated with one of his supervisors, who's a Generation Z, maybe a young millennial. And it's just like, you need to be aware that they have a different perspective. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong perspective, but they do have a different perspective. And we're not diving into that. We're not looking at that. I think that could be a major mistake.
Yeah, that's great advice. And, I want to dive into some, because you told a pretty cool story that I didn't know about from in your article. And it was referring to someone named Johann Baird. And he made this historical technological breakthrough. Can you go ahead? You tell the story about what he invented and why it's so relevant to today's world of work.
Yeah, and so Johann Baird, he was the Scottish inventor. And on January 26, 1926, he demonstrated the world's first working television system. It was a mechanical television system that transmitted live motion images. Think of it as the ancestor of video conference, right? Baird's invention allowed people to see live pictures from different locations, which was revolutionary at the time, right? So the connection to today's world is fascinating, because Baird's early work in transmitting visual information across distances laid the groundwork for video calls, Zoom meetings we rely on today. It's an example of how technology breakthroughs can reshape not just how we communicate, but how we work. So just like the forces shaping the future of work today.
Yeah, that's a neat cascading event, right? A powerful connection, cascading event. How a 1926 invention is the precursor to our modern day virtual meetings and working remotely and all the other things that come with that. So, John, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to the question that's the title of your piece. The title of the article was, "Are we missing something?" ? So what's the one thing you think we might be overlooking as we think about the future of work?
I think that's the big question. I really do. I think that's the big question. And I think the lesson we can take away from history that sometimes it's not the obvious trends that reshape the world, but the hidden ones. Like Johann Baird couldn't foresee that his early television would lead to global Zoom calls. There may be technology or a social trend we're not paying attention to right now that will completely the way we change work in the future. Leaders need to stay curious and keep looking for those hidden forces for sure.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful takeaway. John T. Tallheimer, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. Love it.
Yeah, it's a great, I think it was when I thought about it, because I was thinking about, when I wrote it, I was thinking about what is the future going to be like? What are those things that we're missing that could be right there in front of us? And I will tell you, you have to think about that for your workplace, right? Think about it in terms of, is there an individual, maybe in a department over on the side, that's doing wonderful work that may be the next leader of your organization? Is there a technology that's being adapted in one area that maybe needed to be adapted in other areas? AI is the perfect example. I know we're all using it for different things, but it's going to reshape the way we work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the AI thing is pretty crazy. Just even the last week or two, some of the new things that are coming out with the usage of it. And folks, you got to stay educated, stay on top of it, or you're going to be left behind. But thank you for our listeners for tuning in. Stay curious, stay adaptable, and we'll see you next time as we continue exploring the future of work and telling more stories on the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.